So yes, anyway, we're looking at rhetoric today. We're looking at building paragraphs in an analytical response. And so the method that we've been going over and trying to build with all year is WPAE model. This is where we're taking what y'all had learned before in ACE and kind of expanding it out to kind of make that last step, the latter part in the paragraph, a little bit more specific and a little bit more thorough in terms of building your line of reasoning. And so with any body paragraph, your general structure and progression should be first to introduce your idea in some form of topic sentence. And then after that is when you kind of get into this W, P, A, and E. You're writing quotes. You're paraphrasing to assist with that quote material. It's where you can add some context to that quote. And so I definitely encourage you to get in the habit of using embedded quotes in a timed write. It's going to make your writing much faster, and it will be less disruptive for your reader because the quotes will be integrated with your own voice. And so both the examples today do a pretty good job using embedded quotes. And so I'm pleased that I'm seeing that in y'all's writing. The analysis step, the analyze step, looks at function. So remember, we try to focus on bigger things because if you're trying to show function and you only identify simple parts, it doesn't really give you a whole lot to say. But if you look at compound parts to a response or an idea, then you'll have more to talk about here. So you want to focus on appeals. And then you want to focus on the devices that allow that appeal to function. And that's what you're kind of looking at in the analyze step. And then the evaluate step is where you kind of zoom out. You've analyzed the specific language in a specific moment. So now you're taking a bigger snapshot of the whole situation. And you're thinking about how and why this particular person is using this particular strategy to get across this particular idea at this particular time. And so the evaluate step is kind of where you glue it all back together and put the whole presentation back in context and sort of get back to that original idea that should be clearly stated in your topic sentence. So let's go ahead and look at an example here. But first, let's look at the prompt. We're looking at the Women in Wartime speech from Congresswoman Clare Luce in 1942. And so the question asks you to write an essay that analyzes the rhetorical choices Luce makes to convey her message that women need to be prepared to make more sacrifices as the war effort continues. And so if we're breaking apart this prompt, the abstract is asking you to consider why Clare Boothe Luce has set out to mobilize women on the home front in 1942. And then the concrete is asking you to consider how Clare Boothe Luce is likely going to appeal to her exclusively female audience. Okay. And so I think if you think about 1942, you should pretty easily recognize that this is World War II, a global conflict, and it would be important for Clare Boothe Luce as a congresswoman to mobilize women here at home on in the mainland domestic front to keep society's morale together through routine, through community like teamwork and stuff like that. We're not going to win the war abroad unless we first win the war at home. And so, going in, these are just some ideas that if you stop and think about the prompt for a second before you try to respond, might help you sort of read it a little bit more with a little bit more sophistication, read it a little bit more deeply. The concrete part of the task where you're looking at her choices, if you recognize that her audience is exclusively female, which you should because the prompt tells you, that could give you some insight into the types of strategies she might use to be persuasive to that group. And so that's just something, again, you still have to read the passage to see exactly what choices she's using. But in terms of like pre-reading, it is pretty smart to think about who that audience is and how they might relate to the speaker and how the speaker might relate to them. And so when you're reading, you should be thinking like, what are some ways that the speaker could get through to a group of women versus a mixed group or, a group of men. And so I think both the writers we're going to look at today did a pretty good job of that. And so, excuse me, the first response we're going to look at deals with maternal instinct. And so this is what they said. They said Booth's emotional appeal to the maternal instincts of women across the country lies in her 6th paragraph. Here, she reminds women why we fight wars and make sacrifices, and that's to better our future. She creates a heavy appeal to women by stating that our children, or our, quote, precious treasures, are fed, schooled, and safe from harm. Appealing to the emotional state of her audience as mothers was a strategic appeal designed to encourage compliance on the basis of something other than yourself, and likely children are something that women across the country would sacrifice anything for. That is the basis of maternal instinct. Mothers instinctively protect their children. And so by constructing a sense that participating in the war effort sacrifices not only move us closer to victory, but also creates a safer future for our children, Booth has further convinced her audience that this is a vital task. And so what I'm going to do now is go back and kind of break apart this response and look at the structure of the WPA and E steps, okay? And so the first thing that you should notice, with the color coding here, is that the A and the E step is at least half of the writing in the paragraph. And that's really important in terms of just a quick test to see if you're really covering the topic and building a line of reasoning, is that you have all the steps included and that proportionally you're doing as much analysis as you are paraphrasing or summarizing what Booth said. Okay. And so, a lot of the lower scoring responses that I see on question 2 replace the task. They spend most of the time talking about what the speaker said and summarizing their point rather than analyzing how and why that point was constructed and what impact it might have had on that particular audience. And so when we're looking at the WP, that's the step in yellow, looking in the 6th paragraph, the responder, I think, has been pretty successful here, blending some paraphrased and quote material for this efficient delivery. They've pulled a specific word choice reference when they talk about how Booth identifies children to her female audience as precious treasures. And I think that helps. And I think this writer was on point here, too. That they set up their maternal instinct appeal that they analyze later. And so, again, with evidence, it's about being efficient. They didn't copy 5 lines of text or anything like that. They, did a nice simple paraphrase, and they caught an emotional triggering word choice, right? Something that for maternal instinct anyway, would connect with the idea. In their analysis step, they did a nice job of putting together a simple cause and effect. Booth appealed to the maternal instinct here because her audience is a bunch of women, right? She's trying to get them to comply instinctively without questioning. She's asking them to sacrifice, right? I think that this latter part of the paragraph could have been a little bit more detailed about what exactly Booth wanted her audience to comply with, but the idea is intact. She wanted her audience to comply, and so she used something that would instinctively make them reply without question, which was appealing to their maternal instinct. To don't do this, just because I'm telling you to, or because the president said so. Do it because it's for the kids, and I know you all will do anything for kids. And then the most important part here is the E. They did a good job of including this. A lot of times in lower responses, less successful responses, this step is omitted. So the responder here has connected why the emotional appeal is important to Booth's efforts. It could have been more specifically detailed about what needed to be sacrificed. In this case, she's asking women to sacrifice comfort and fashion. But overall, the response is complete. They started out with an idea at the top to talk about how she's appealing to maternal instinct. And then they've come through and really kind of explained for me, help me see how they recognize that. And that's, that's basically all you have to do is start with an idea and then lead me back to it through explanation, through showing me that how and why. And so let's look at the second one here. Clare Luce highlighted the urgency of the wartime through compare and contrast. Luce described American women's wartime life as glamorous, and their participants were interesting in comparison to the harsh reality of war being the toughest war in history. These comparisons conveyed the idea that while women are currently having a decent life, they should not forget that their country is experiencing a dramatic period of time. The comparison of the women's life and the war helps portray the urgency of the situation and that women's participation in the war was still limited. This message's audience is a group of women who are part of the banking community. In the 1940s, women have more participation in society and workforce, but the opportunities were limited. Luce specifically highlighted the glamorous life of these women to create the sense of embarrassment so that women will reconsider their lifestyle and put in even more effort on sacrifices, some lifestyle, and support the war. Through indicating the toughness of war, Luce successfully shifted our audience's focus from concerning individual lifestyle change to sacrificing for the country. Okay? And so I didn't think this was an unsuccessful response, but there was, you'll see just in the color portrayal here, I think there's too much going on in the middle of the paragraph in A. I think it is a little distracting. They did a pretty decent job at the top of just making a clear reference to contrast, right? I think they've also done a good job of connecting this idea of urgency at the top. It's not like we need women to sacrifice later or when they feel like it. This is kind of like a now problem. I think there's a couple sentences in the middle here. The sentence about the audience's involvement in banking, and there's some redundancy and just some sentences I don't think that fit the idea. They're a little distracting. The critical connection that should be happening in A, and it does, but it has some distraction to it, is the connection about the urgent reality of the situation and the glamorous portrayal of American fashion. And so, towards the end too, I think in the E, I don't know if embarrassment is necessarily the right word. I can tell that the responder here means that Booth is trying to shame her audience, to say basically, you should be ashamed to be worried about fashion and comfort when there's a war on. You should be doing more to help. You're oblivious to reality, that kind of thing. And that would be, pretty convincing to get her point across. And so I can see the value here, but there's definitely some issues with the delivery in the blue section that just make it a little bit clunky